The story of humanity begins in one place. It begins in Africa, the land where the first heartbeat of humankind echoed across the plains, the soil where the earliest footprints of our ancestors were pressed into the earth, the cradle of civilization where life itself drew its first breath. When we speak of the origin of Black people, we are not speaking of a small, isolated history. We are speaking of the origin of the human story. Every person on earth, no matter the color of their skin, carries within their DNA the trace of that African beginning. The origin of Black people is the origin of us all, and that is a truth that deserves to be told with pride, power, and clarity. Imagine the vast landscapes of Africa millions of years ago, sunlight pouring across endless savannas, rivers cutting paths through fertile valleys, mountains rising against skies of fire and gold. In this land, the earliest ancestors of humankind began to walk upright, began to use tools, began to speak. Fossils like Lucy, discovered in Ethiopia, date back more than 3 million years. The bones tell the story of a people who stood tall and began the long journey that would one day lead to every corner of the earth. Africa is not just the homeland of Black people, it is the homeland of humanity. When you speak of Black origin, you are speaking of the original seed from which the tree of mankind has grown. Through time, these early humans learned to shape their world. They learned to craft tools from stone, to tame fire, to hunt together, and to protect one another. They developed languages to share knowledge, cultures to pass on traditions, and communities that laid the foundation of society itself. As thousands of years passed, these people spread across the continent and beyond, carrying with them the genius of survival, the gift of adaptation, and the creativity that makes us human. The origin of Black people is not a story of limitation, but a story of brilliance, of people who turned challenges into progress and harsh environments into fertile ground for growth. Africa gave birth to some of the greatest civilizations the world has ever known. Along the Nile, the kingdoms of Kemet, known to the world as ancient Egypt, rose to glory. Their pyramids still pierce the skies after thousands of years. Monuments not only of stone but of genius, of mathematics, engineering, architecture, and vision. Farther south in Nubia, powerful empires thrived, trading gold, ivory, and culture with the world. Across West Africa, empires such as Mali, Songhai, and Ghana became centers of wealth and learning. Timbuktu, often spoken of only in whispers of myth, was once home to libraries and universities that attracted scholars from every land. These were Black empires, Black cities, Black centers of wisdom and light at a time when much of the world remained in shadow. The origin of Black people is not just about survival, but about contribution. Africa was not only the birthplace of humanity, but the wellspring of ideas, knowledge, and creativity. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy were cultivated in African soil long before many other parts of the world began to awaken. The people of Africa charted the stars, mapped the seasons, and understood the rhythm of the earth. They built systems of trade that spanned continents, connecting Africa with Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. This is not a hidden history. It is a history that has too often been silenced or minimized, but it is real and it is powerful. Yet history also carries with it pain. As centuries unfolded, Africa became a target for conquest and exploitation. The transatlantic slave trade ripped millions of men, women, and children from their homeland, scattering them across the Americas, the Caribbean, and beyond. Families were torn apart, cultures disrupted, and identities shattered. For centuries, Black people endured suffering, oppression, and injustice that defied imagination. But even in chains, their spirit could not be broken. They carried with them the songs of their ancestors, the memory of their homelands, and the resilience that had been born in the heart of Africa. Wherever they were taken, they rebuilt, they resisted, they survived. Out of that suffering came strength. The descendants of Africa transformed pain into power. In fields and plantations, they sang songs of freedom. In towns and cities, they built communities of hope. They gave the world music, art, language, and culture that would forever shape humanity. From spirituals to blues, From jazz to hip-hop, the rhythm of Black history has become the heartbeat of the world. From African drumming to modern beats, the music of Black people tells the story of endurance, identity, and triumph. The origin of Black people is not defined by slavery. It is defined by resilience, creativity, and a refusal to surrender to despair. When you study the history of Black people, you see a journey of rising again and again, from Africa's first empires to the struggle against colonial rule to the fight for civil rights in every nation where Black people have lived. The story is the same, a people who refuse to bow, who refuse to be erased, who claim their dignity and their destiny with courage. Leaders, thinkers, and dreamers have risen from every generation, calling the world to recognize not only the equality but the greatness of Black people. And today the story continues. From science to politics, from business to art, Black people are leading, innovating, and shaping the world. The origin of Black people is not something locked in the past. It is a living source of strength that flows into the present. When a child of African descent looks in the mirror, they are not looking at a body defined by limitation. They are looking at the continuation of the oldest and greatest story on earth. They are the descendants of the first people, the carriers of the original flame of humanity. The origin of Black people is not a narrow story, it is a universal one. It reminds every human being where we came from and who we are, but it also carries a unique call, a call to remember that Black identity is not one of inferiority, but of origin, of depth, of brilliance. When the world seeks to divide people by color, when it tries to diminish the contribution of Black people, when it buries the truth of history, the answer is not silence. The answer is knowledge. The answer is pride. The answer is the unshakable truth that Black people are not at the margins of history. They are at its very beginning. So let us speak clearly. The origin of Black people is the origin of civilization itself. The first scientists, the first builders, the first dreamers, the first travelers, the first storytellers walked with dark skin under the African sun. They were not only the ancestors of Black people, they were the ancestors of us all. To understand that is to recognize the unity of the human family and the dignity of Black heritage. For too long, the world has tried to rewrite the story. Too often, history books have painted Africa only in the colors of poverty, conflict, or despair. Too often, the brilliance of Black history has been hidden or stolen. But no matter how much truth is buried, it will always rise again. The pyramids still stand. The libraries of Timbuktu still whisper. The art, the music, the voices of Black people still thunder across the earth. The origin of Black people cannot be erased. It is etched into the very DNA of humanity. And this truth carries a lesson for every person. If the origin of Black people is the origin of humanity, then to uplift Black people is to uplift us all. To honor Black history is to honor human history. To recognize Black greatness is to recognize human greatness. This is not about division, it is about truth. And truth has the power to heal, to unite, and to inspire. So when you think of the origin of Black people, do not think only of the past. Think of the future. Think of the children of Africa and the diaspora who carry in their hearts the same fire that lit the first human soul. Think of the innovators, the leaders, the visionaries who will rise in generations to come. Think of a world where the story is told in full, where dignity is given in full, where every child, no matter their color, knows that the first people, the original people, were Black, and that in their strength humanity was born. The origin of Black people is not just history, it is hope. It is the reminder that no matter how deep the suffering, greatness can and will rise again. It is the reminder that every human being carries a spark of Africa within them. And it is the call to remember that truth, to honor it, and to live with the dignity and pride that comes from knowing who we are and where we come from. The story of humanity is deeply rooted in one land, a land that gave birth to the first spark of life that would eventually shape the destiny of the entire world. That land is Africa. When we say Africa is the cradle of humanity, we are saying something that is not just poetic or symbolic, but something that is supported by science, history, and truth. It is the land where the earliest human beings first walked, where they learned to stand upright, where they began to think, create, and form the beginnings of culture and society. Africa is not just another continent on the map, it is the very origin point of humanity itself, the source from which every person, no matter where they come from, carries a connection. To speak of Africa is to speak of our collective beginning. Scientists have discovered fossils in places like Ethiopia, Kenya, and Tanzania that date back millions of years, proving that the earliest human ancestors lived and thrived there. Names like Lucy and Turkana Boyd are not just archaeological finds, they are the evidence of our common ancestry. These bones tell a story that unites us all. When the first humans began to walk upright, when they began to use tools, when they began to communicate in ways that carried meaning, it was happening under the African sun. This is why Africa is called the cradle of humanity. It is the birthplace of thought, of creativity, of innovation. Every language, every tradition, every culture in the world carries echoes of that first beginning. What makes this truth so powerful is that it gives dignity and weight to the story of Black people. Too often, history has tried to begin elsewhere, as if the greatness of humanity started only when Europe or other parts of the world rose to power. But long before those empires ever existed, long before other nations found their place in history, Africa had already given the world its most important gift, life itself. The origin of Black people is not just a side story or a chapter in history, it is the very foundation upon which the story of humankind stands. To recognize Africa as the cradle of humanity is to recognize that Black heritage is universal heritage, that Black history is human history. Think for a moment about what it means that the first people were African. It means that the earliest footsteps pressed into the soil of the earth were made by Black people. It means the first ideas, the first sparks of imagination, the first acts of survival and cooperation all came from Black ancestors. Every invention that would follow, every discovery that would shape the modern world, rests on that original human journey that began in Africa. When we look at the world today and see diversity in skin tones, languages, and cultures, we are seeing the branches of a tree that grew from the same root. That root is African, and that origin belongs to us all. But this truth also calls us to remember that Africa's role is not only biological, it is also cultural, intellectual, and spiritual in the sense of humanity's shared values. The people of Africa did not simply survive, they thrived. They adapted to climates that were harsh, they hunted and gathered, they created tools that would be refined across generations. They formed social bonds that laid the foundation for families, tribes, and eventually civilization. These were not primitive wanderers with no direction. They were pioneers who built the path for everything that would come after. Their courage to face the unknown, their persistence in the face of struggle, and their ability to adapt and create were the qualities that ensured humanity's survival. And these qualities remain in the DNA of Black people today. As these early Africans began to move, they carried with them knowledge and resilience. They migrated out of Africa and spread across the continents, but Africa always remained the starting point. What the world must never forget is that wherever humanity went, it carried Africa within it. Even today, genetic research shows that every human alive shares ancestry that traces back to Africa. No matter the color of our skin or the language we speak, we all share that original bond. This is a profound truth that has the power to break down the barriers of racism and division, because when we honor Africa as the cradle of humanity, we honor the truth that we are all one family. Yet at the same time, we must also acknowledge that this universal truth has not always been recognized. For centuries, the world has often tried to dismiss Africa as backward or secondary, erasing its central role in history. But no matter how hard that truth has been buried, it cannot be destroyed. The fossils remain, the evidence remains, the cultures remain, the living descendants of those first people remain. And their presence is a reminder that Africa cannot be overlooked, that Black people cannot be written out of the story, because without Africa there would be no story at all. Africa being the cradle of humanity is not just about looking back. It is about looking forward. It is about understanding that the same creative force, the same survival instinct, the same brilliance that gave rise to humanity still exists in the descendants of Africa today. Black people are not only the carriers of a great past, but the creators of a powerful future. The resilience that allowed the first people to endure is the same resilience that has allowed Black people to survive centuries of hardship and to continue rising, leading, and shaping the world. When a young person of African descent hears that Africa is the cradle of humanity, it should fill them with pride, not shame. It should remind them that their identity is not something to hide, but something to celebrate. They are the descendants of the first dreamers, the first builders, the first thinkers. They are part of the original human story, and their lives carry a weight of dignity that no prejudice can erase. And when anyone from any background hears that Africa is the cradle of humanity, it should inspire them to see beyond division, to see that we all come from the same source, that our diversity is not a reason for separation, but a testament to our shared strength. The origin of humanity in Africa is not just a fact, it is a lesson. It teaches us about humility, about unity, and about resilience. It shows us that greatness can arise from struggle, that brilliance can emerge from simple beginnings, and that the human spirit has always been capable of transformation. Africa gave the world its first light, and that light has never gone out. It shines in the history, the culture, and the lives of Black people today. It shines in every person because we all carry a spark of that original fire. Africa is the cradle of humanity. To speak those words is to tell the truth about where we come from. To believe those words is to give honor to the first people who walked this earth. And to live by those words is to carry forward the dignity, strength, and unity that began under the African sun. The greatness of human civilization cannot be told without telling the story of Africa, because Africa was not only the place where humanity began, but also the land where some of the earliest and most powerful civilizations rose and flourished. Too often, the history of civilization is described as if it began in Greece, Rome, or Mesopotamia. But long before those names rose into prominence, Africa had already built thriving societies, kingdoms, and empires that left their marks on history forever. To speak of Egypt, Nubia, Mali, Songhai, Ghana, and Timbuktu is to speak of centers of brilliance, wealth, learning, and influence. These civilizations were not isolated or insignificant. They were global forces that helped shape the world. They were Black empires led by Black kings and queens, built by the genius and vision of Black people whose contributions still echo through time. When you look at the pyramids of Egypt standing tall against the desert sky, you are not just looking at stone monuments, you are looking at the evidence of extraordinary achievement. These structures, built thousands of years ago, remain some of the most remarkable engineering feats in human history. The mathematics, the astronomy, the precision, the organization, and the sheer vision required to construct them are proof of a civilization far advanced in knowledge and ability. The civilization of ancient Egypt was more than its monuments. It gave the world systems of writing, methods of medicine, advancements in mathematics, agricultural techniques that turned deserts into fertile fields, and an understanding of governance that influenced later societies. Egypt was not a lone star, but the shining crown of African civilization, and its light was carried forward by other kingdoms along the Nile and beyond. South of Egypt, the Nubian kingdoms rose in strength. Nubia was not a mere shadow of Egypt, as history sometimes tries to present it, but a powerful empire in its own right. Its rulers, its armies, its traders extended influence across the region. Nubia had its own kings, its own monuments, and even periods when it ruled over Egypt itself. The greatness of Nubia demonstrates that African civilizations were not defined by being conquered, but by their ability to thrive, compete, and dominate in their own way. Their legacy of artistry, their skills in metalwork, and their military power all testify to a civilization deeply rooted in innovation and strength. Moving westward, across the vast expanse of the Sahara, we find the golden empires of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. These empires controlled trade routes that linked Africa with Europe and Asia. They became centers of immense wealth because they sat at the crossroads of commerce. Gold and salt, two of the most valuable resources of the ancient world, flowed through their land. But these kingdoms were not merely rich in materials, they were rich in culture, governance, and learning. The Empire of Ghana laid the foundation for trade systems that connected regions far beyond Africa. Mali, under the leadership of figures like Mansa Musa, became legendary not just for wealth but for vision. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage to Mecca remains one of the most famous journeys in history, not only because of the unimaginable amounts of gold he displayed along the way, but because it showed the world the power and sophistication of an African king. His journey was a statement to the world. Africa was not poor or hidden. Africa was a land of greatness. In the city of Timbuktu, knowledge was treasured like gold. Timbuktu housed universities and libraries where scholars gathered, studied, and taught. Ancient manuscripts from this city still survive today, covering subjects as wide as mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and law. At a time when much of Europe struggled through what would later be called the Dark Ages, Timbuktu shone as a beacon of intellectual light. Students traveled from across the continent and beyond to learn there. The scholars of Timbuktu preserved knowledge and created new wisdom that influenced thinkers far outside of Africa. It was not a mythic city at the edge of the world, as European explorers once imagined, but a vibrant intellectual powerhouse that proves Africa was not behind history but ahead of it. The Songhai Empire continued this legacy of power and learning, controlling vast territories and building systems of governance that ensured order across diverse peoples. Songhai rulers organized armies, developed taxation systems, and maintained trade networks that spanned thousands of miles. Their ability to manage such a vast and diverse empire demonstrates advanced political and administrative skills, the kind that shaped the way nations could function. The significance of these civilizations cannot be overstated. They show that Africa was not a continent waiting for others to bring it progress. It was a land of progress in itself. It was a continent of builders, of thinkers, of dreamers, of rulers who commanded respect across the world. The idea that Africa was only ever a land of suffering or primitiveness is a distortion that history has too often repeated. But the truth speaks louder than lies. The truth is that African civilizations laid the foundations for global trade, global culture, and global knowledge. And yet, these stories are rarely told in full. The world often remembers Rome and Greece, but forgets Mali and Songhai. It remembers the philosophers of Athens, but not the scholars of Timbuktu. It remembers the riches of Europe's kings, but not the unimaginable wealth of Mansa Musa, a man often described as the richest in human history. But forgetting does not erase. The monuments remain, the manuscripts remain, and the descendants of those civilizations remain, carrying within them the same genius and strength that built the empires of old. What is inspiring about these civilizations is not just their accomplishments in the past, but what they teach us about the present and the future. They remind us that Black history is not only a story of survival through hardship, but also a story of leadership, creativity, and contribution. They show young people of African descent that their history is not a burden but a crown, not a tale of weakness but of greatness. They demonstrate that Black identity is rooted not in chains but in kingdoms, not in silence but in voices that spoke with wisdom and authority. The civilizations of Africa shaped the world, not only through their wealth and power but through their ability to inspire. Even today, when we speak of justice, knowledge, progress, and resilience, we are echoing the lessons of these ancient African empires. They were examples of what humanity could achieve, and prove that the spirit of Africa has always been a spirit of greatness. To expand the story of these civilizations is to expand the story of humanity itself, because the world we live in today was influenced and enriched by the contributions of Black people long before modern history began to acknowledge them. The pyramids of Egypt, the manuscripts of Timbuktu, the wealth of Mali, the strength of Nubia, the order of Songhai, all of these are chapters in a history that is too vast and too powerful to ever be erased. These civilizations shaped the world, and their legacy continues to call us to remember, to honor, and to rise. The story of Black people across history is a story marked not only by greatness and contribution, but also by immense suffering that was forced upon them through slavery, colonization, and oppression. And yet, in the face of that suffering, what emerges is not defeat, but resilience, not silence, but song, not despair, but a determination to live, to create, and to rise. It is this resilience, this unshakable strength, that has carried Black people through centuries of unimaginable hardship. When chains sought to bind, they refused to let their spirits be chained. When systems sought to erase their dignity, they carried dignity within themselves. When voices were silenced, they spoke through song, through rhythm, through the passing down of memory and identity. Resilience is not simply surviving. Resilience is taking suffering and transforming it into strength that not only preserves a people, but empowers them to move forward with hope. The transatlantic slave trade remains one of the darkest chapters in human history. Millions of men, women, and children were ripped from their homes, torn from families, and forced onto ships where countless lives were lost even before reaching foreign shores. Those who survived carried the weight of pain that no words can fully describe. Yet even in those conditions, something remarkable happened. They did not surrender their humanity. They created ways to hold on to memory, to culture, to identity, even when the world tried to strip it all away. Through stories whispered in the night, through songs sung in the fields, through spiritual rhythms that carried the echoes of Africa, they kept alive a flame that refused to die. That flame of resilience became a light for generations to come. On plantations and in oppressive systems where Black people were treated as property, they found ways to preserve their spirit. They worked, they toiled, but they also dreamed. They created families in the most broken of circumstances. They formed communities that looked after one another. They drew strength from the knowledge that even if the present was filled with pain, the future could be shaped by their determination to endure. It was resilience that kept them alive physically, but more importantly, it was resilience that kept them alive spiritually and culturally. They held on to music, to rhythm, to the memory of freedom, and in holding on, they planted seeds that would one day grow into movements of liberation. When slavery was abolished, resilience did not end. It transformed. Black people stepped into new forms of struggle, facing segregation, discrimination, and systemic barriers designed to keep them from equality. But time and again, they rose. They built schools where none were provided. They created businesses where opportunity was denied. They made art, music, and culture that the world could not ignore. They turned every wall placed before them into a canvas upon which they painted proof of their humanity. They did not simply wait for freedom to be given. They demanded it. They fought for it. They lived it even before it was recognized by others. Colonization added another layer of pain, as African nations were carved apart and controlled by outside powers who extracted wealth and resources, while leaving the people in chains of poverty and division. Yet here too, resilience spoke louder than oppression. Across Africa, leaders rose who refused to accept the idea that the continent's future could be determined by others. They organized, they resisted, they led movements of independence that shook the foundations of colonial rule. Even when confronted with violence and suppression, they refused to give in. That determination brought freedom to nations across Africa, and though challenges remained, the act of reclaiming sovereignty was itself an extraordinary demonstration of resilience. Resilience in the face of suffering is not only about survival in the physical sense, it is about the transformation of pain into creativity. From the fields of slavery came the roots of music that would shape the entire world: blues, jazz, gospel, reggae, soul, hip-hop, all born from the resilience of Black people who turned suffering into song. These were not just sounds, they were testimonies of endurance. They were messages of hope coded into rhythm. They were the voices of people who refused to be silenced, and through their music, the entire world was touched, transformed, and inspired. That same resilience appears in literature and poetry and art that speaks the unspeakable and transforms anguish into beauty. Writers, poets, and thinkers took the weight of oppression and turned it into words that carried truth across generations. They wrote to remind the world that they were not invisible, not broken, not powerless, but alive, strong, and determined. In every era, voices rose that could not be suppressed, voices that carried the stories of ancestors and spoke directly to the hearts of future generations. The resilience of Black people is also seen in the way culture was preserved against all odds. When languages were stolen, they created new ones, blending words into Creole and dialects that kept communication alive. When traditions were attacked, they reshaped them, adapting rituals so that they survived in hidden forms until they could flourish again openly. When names were taken, they carried pride in the memory of the identities they had lost, passing down meaning through actions, values, and community. This ability to hold on and adapt is the essence of resilience. It is not only resistance against destruction, but creation in the midst of destruction. Even today, in societies across the globe where inequality and discrimination still persist, the resilience of Black people continues to shine. It is seen in achievements across science, politics, arts, sports, and every field of human endeavor. It is seen in leaders who stand up against injustice, in communities that continue to thrive despite adversity, and young people who claim their heritage with pride and refuse to let the past define the limits of their future. It is resilience that turns challenges into opportunities, suffering into wisdom, and struggle into triumph. To reflect on the resilience of Black people is to recognize one of the most powerful truths of human history. No amount of suffering, no level of oppression has been able to break the spirit of a people who have endured everything and yet still rise. That resilience is not only a gift for Black communities, it is a gift for the world. It teaches us that strength is not found in avoiding suffering, but in facing it and overcoming it. It teaches us that hope can survive in the darkest of nights, that identity can endure when everything else is stripped away, and that dignity is something no force on earth can permanently destroy. The resilience of Black people in the face of suffering is one of humanity's greatest testaments to endurance. It shows us what is possible when the human spirit refuses to surrender. It tells us that no matter the weight of chains, the flame of freedom cannot be extinguished. It reminds us that even when the world is cruel, people can rise, build, and create beauty out of pain. That resilience continues to shape the present and inspire the future, proving that from the deepest suffering can come the greatest strength. The story of Black people has never been only about where they came from or what they endured. It is also about where they are going and the future they continue to shape. Too often, history is told as if it ends with the past, as if the greatest parts of the story have already been written. But when you look at the journey of Black people, you see something different. You see that their origin is not a closed chapter, but an open book, that their beginning is not something finished, but a foundation for all that is still to come. The same strength that carried the first people across the plains of Africa, the same determination that endured through centuries of oppression, the same creativity that gave the world music, art, and innovation is alive today and will continue to live tomorrow. The origin is also the future, because the flame that was lit in the beginning has never gone out. It is burning brighter than ever in new generations who are shaping the world with vision and courage. When a young Black child looks in the mirror, they are not only looking at the reflection of their present, they are looking at a history that stretches back to the very dawn of humanity and forward to possibilities that have yet to be imagined. They carry within them the legacy of survival, the proof of greatness, and the power of creativity. But they also carry the future, the potential to create, to innovate, to lead, and to build in ways the world has never seen before. The story of Black people is alive because it is constantly being written in classrooms, in businesses, in laboratories, on stages, in communities, and in every place where imagination turns into reality. The future is not something waiting far ahead. It is being made every day by Black voices, Black minds, and Black hands that continue to shape the course of humanity. Look at the world of science and innovation, where Black thinkers and creators are advancing technology, medicine, and research that will define the future. Their discoveries are curing diseases, connecting people, and reshaping how society lives and works. In politics and leadership, Black leaders continue to rise, guiding nations, shaping policies, and inspiring change. In art and culture, Black creators give the world new visions, new sounds, and new ways of seeing life. From film to literature, from music to fashion, the future of global culture is being built with the creativity of Black people who draw from their deep heritage, while also moving boldly into new territory. The influence is not local, it is worldwide, touching every continent, every community, every industry. The origin is also the future, because resilience has never been only about enduring hardship. It has been about building beyond it. Every barrier that has been placed before Black people has been turned into an opportunity to prove what is possible. Every attempt to silence has resulted in new forms of expression that the world could not ignore. Every denial of opportunity has led to the creation of new spaces where innovation could thrive. This pattern is not just history, it is the rhythm of the future. It means that no matter what challenges arise, Black people have shown and will continue to show the ability to rise higher, to create more, and to inspire the world with their vision. The beauty of this truth is that it reminds us the story is never static. The origin is not something frozen in time, It is a living river that flows forward, feeding new generations with strength and wisdom. What began in Africa did not end in Africa. It spread across the globe, carried by migration, by struggle, by survival, and by the determination to endure. Today, in every country, in every city, there are Black communities whose presence is a testament to that journey. They are not simply remembering the past. They are creating the future. They are building businesses, leading movements, telling stories, and raising children who will carry the flame even further. The future shaped by Black people is not only about survival or endurance, it is about vision. It is about imagining worlds where justice, creativity, and humanity thrive. It is about building technologies that solve problems, creating art that inspires change, leading societies toward progress, and redefining what is possible for generations to come. The story does not end with oppression, nor does it end with resilience. It continues into leadership, innovation, and greatness that will guide the future of humanity. And perhaps the most powerful truth of all is that the origin, being the future, is not limited to Black people alone. It is a lesson for everyone. If humanity began in Africa, if the first people were Black, then the story of Black people is the story of us all. To honor the future shaped by Black people is to honor the future of humanity itself. To recognize their contributions, their struggles, and their triumphs is to recognize the ongoing journey of humankind. The future is shared, but it is enriched, inspired, and uplifted by the legacy and leadership of Black communities who have always been at the heart of human progress. The future is also a responsibility. It means that the younger generations must see themselves not as limited by the past, but as empowered by it. They must understand that their heritage is not something to hide, but something to claim with pride, because it is both the oldest story and the newest hope. It means that society must ensure that opportunities are open, that voices are heard, and that the future being shaped is one where Black creativity and leadership are given space to shine. It means remembering that the journey of Black people is not over, because it will never be over. It will always be alive, always evolving, always rising. The origin is also the future, because the story of Black people carries within it an unbroken chain of survival, strength, and creativity. From the first footsteps in Africa to the present and beyond, it is a story that reminds us that beginnings are not ending. They are seeds, and those seeds grow into forests that cover the earth. The seed planted at the origin continues to grow in every innovation, in every song, in every achievement, in every act of resilience and leadership that Black people bring into the world today. The future is not separate from the past. It is the continuation of the same flame that has burned since the dawn of time. And so when we speak of Black people, we must not only speak of where they came from, nor only of what they endured. We must speak of where they are going, of what they are building, of how they are shaping the world that is yet to come. The future is theirs to create, and in creating it, they shape the destiny of all humanity. The origin is the future because the story that began in Africa is not over. It is alive in every heartbeat, in every dream, in every act of courage, and in every moment of creation. That story will continue as long as humanity exists, reminding us all that beginnings are powerful, not because they end, but because they live on in the future. They inspire.